Sostenes Lima, and today we're going to talk a little bit about conflict, right? We have conflict as a couple, and one thing also, what also happens, we also have conflict with our patients at times, and I think people tend to forget, or we don't talk about as much in the therapy world, that like therapist and client will have conflicts. This is part of therapy, to have conflict, and there's reasons for it. Is a sort of an intervention at times, but it's also a very healing thing to have in our sessions.
Yeah, I think we all have some type of an aversion or relationship to conflict, depending on our upbringing and how different people in our lives responded to conflicts. And was there any type of repair? Was there absence? Was there, was it taboo that we couldn't talk about it? Was it aggressive or violent, right? Like there's so many different relationships or experiences we may have around conflict. So it makes sense that a lot of us don't want to cause conflict, don't want to have conflict, don't want it to be present in the room, or we may have a whole physiological reaction to this concept of conflict when we perceive there is a conflict. But this is a really interesting concept for us as therapists to be able to bring in conflict in a safe way in the therapeutic space. That, hey, this is something that can emerge, that will emerge at some point during this therapeutic relationship. And in fact, it's very helpful. It's very effective in actually kind of deepening our understanding of who we are, what we're feeling that could be in conflict with someone else. So it also really helps with like identity formation to really understand more of who we are, opposed to maybe defaulting to what somebody else thinks or believes or experiences. So yeah, I think this is a very kind of, it's not often talked about, but it is something that I think both of us try to even have this conversation with our clients, where we just normalize, hey, at some point I'm going to say something that will offend you, that will hurt you. Of course, my intention will not be to do this, but at some point it will happen. So this just kind of like normalizes that it is a normal part of being human. It will happen. And when it does happen, I really welcome being able to talk about it and for us to be able to process through it.
Yeah, 100%. And I know for myself, I tend to bring it in really early in treatment. Maybe like the second or third session, I will encourage the clients to begin to think about conflict, right? In a way of like, hey, if I say anything that hurt you, if I say anything in the future or if I do something in general that rubs you the wrong way, or you feel like I'm not listening, or you feel like I've said something, or I interpreted something that doesn't sit well with you, please bring it up, right? So I start planting these seeds in that, like, conflict is okay. Like, healthy conflict is okay. And we're able to sort of begin to have that person start taking in the idea of conflict as it being an okay part of our sessions, right? Start giving them, in a way, like permission to be able to kind of sit with it and talk about it in session.
Yeah, I would just say also from like an attachment-centered lens, right? Like the center of this and the goal of this is to kind of help folks be able to repair difficult attachment relationships in their life. And one way that we do that is in the therapy space, and being able to repair some of that wounding that has happened historically for the client, but also in real time as it happens with real humans and real people. But the goal is obviously to do this in a nurturing and a safe way that helps to mend some of those wounds.
Yeah, and I think the technique or the intervention that's commonly known in therapy is called like rupture and repair, right? So the work that we do is that we have these ruptures and we're finding ways to kind of repair it, right, in the present moment, and that in itself gives the client an idea of like, okay, like I can go to places with my therapist where they were able to kind of hold these conflicts that I might have, right? Being trauma, being their stories, being whatever it might be, right? We have internal conflicts within us, right? And I think that's huge, that for us to hold that in the present moment with them. It's a way for them to know, okay, like I can go here with my therapist. And again, just kind of back to the idea of like stories, right? In our history and all of that. All of our histories have some level of conflicts, right? Our memories have levels of conflicts. Our traumas sometimes have levels of conflict. It's not just a black and white experience. And we're constantly trying to resolve that, trying to explore it, and trying to understand it and heal from it, right? In this episode, we interviewed David Hernandez, right? And David Hernandez shares a bit about his background and his upbringing and the experiences he had and the traumas that he experienced as a child. David Hernandez is a therapist in Los Angeles and good friend of ours, and he does such a beautiful job of communicating that like, here's my story, here's these conflicts that I experienced as a child. These are some conflicts that I'm still trying to resolve in this current moment that I'm in. And it comes up in my sessions, and it comes up in different spaces, right? And we're able to kind of explore and talk about these things, right? And I think it's huge. And if, right, as therapists, if we can hold some of these conflicts, our own internal conflicts, right? How much more our clients are able to hold these complexities that they hold, these different parts, whatever it might be that they have.
Yeah. And I would add, I mean, it just kind of removes this veil of the therapist being this blank slate, right? Mm-hmm. That we also have our own histories, our own traumas, our own identities of who we are that can be in conflict with the client. And that doesn't have to be something that's bad or wrong. That can actually be welcomed, and that allows us to bring in the full parts of who we are into this space, opposed to feeling like we have to hide parts of our identity or parts of our history, or some parts of ourselves are not welcome, and then having to like maneuver around in that kind of way. So I think this is a wonderful idea for, as you'll notice what David Hernandez talks about is being able to bring kind of your full self into the room. So
yeah, so a little bit about David. David is a therapist in Los Angeles. He is Mexican American Filipino. I worked with him, so we used to work in a group practice together. So you kind of hear some of that banter in our interview, because we just kind of know each other from a background. And also, David has a podcast called The Push Project, right? Where he also encouraged other folks to kind of share their stories, right? And where they have come from. He also is a radio personality in Los Angeles as well. A lot of people don't know that about him, right? So that's a little bit about David. It was a really wonderful episode. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to the House of Therapy podcast. Today I have David Hernandez, LCSW. I know David for, is it 5 years? A little bit more, or around that time?
Yeah, several years, yep.
Yeah. Me and David used to work at a group practice together. For a while, this is a funny joke, I thought David Hernandez was Hispanic. He's Filipino.
Well, I'm both.
Okay.
Mexican and Filipino.
Okay, see, I misjudged you there as well.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, so I guess tell me a little bit about your background. I had the privilege, I don't know, a few years back, I was listening to a podcast and I heard David on the podcast, and I got to hear a little bit about his background that I didn't know, right? He's a coworker, but I did not know about his background and what kind of led him to this field. I mean, David's an awesome person. He's been in the mental health field for 20 plus years. He doesn't look like it, but he's been in it for a while. David, tell me a little bit about yourself. You also are a radio co-host as well, right? So tell me a little bit about yourself and what kind of led you to this field as well.
Thank you, Sostenes. I appreciate you and your wife for inviting me on, man, to be on the podcast. It's always fun to be able to chop it up on the mental health piece. because, and I want to go back half a step too. Isn't it strange how, yeah, we can be working in this field alongside people for a long time, and you never really have a chance to just step out and get to know somebody on a personal level because you got your head down, you're grinding so hard sometimes. Because when I joined that group practice, Epiphany, man, I was just getting my feet wet. You know, I was just out of grad school. I'm a late bloomer, so I just turned 48, but I didn't go back to grad school until I was 42. And, you know, at that point, I'm already well into the mental health space. I've been helping families and children for a long time. So my mind was just like, all right, this goal is to get licensed and be a therapist. And then, as I thought it would be, the world kind of opened up in opportunities and stuff. And so, you know, man, I'm just a kid that was born and raised in San Diego. My father's Mexican. My mom is Filipino and German, actually, but you don't see none of that at all. But so my dad was a very talkative, friendly, outgoing kind of guy all the time. So I got that quality from my dad for sure. My mom, 4'11", spark plug, little firecracker of a Filipina, had a lot of spunk. Both my parents grew up in the hood, man, of San Diego. And they were just babies when they met each other. They were babies when they got pregnant with me. My mom was 18. My dad was 19. And they had no business having no kids. But as you know, man, young people are making babies. And then trying to figure it out on the back end. And a testament to a lot of amazing parents, a lot of amazing women, mostly, they seem to be the ones that are sticking around more often than the dads, unfortunately. In our line of work, we see that all the time. And, you know, they had this young kid that they almost didn't have. They got some advice early on while they were pregnant with me not to have me, and my mom said no. I think my mom and dad both said, "Nah, we want to have our child." And so they had me. I was born July 11th, 1976. And as my mom tells me, my dad split. Once I was born, my dad took off. And he was gone for like a year. For the first year of my life, it was me and my mom. We lived with a family friend who, you know, I grew to love and call auntie, and her husband, uncle. And, you know, that village. The community, the village helped my mom, a 19-year-old, raise her new son. Now, being so young, you know, but I didn't realize my dad was gone. I didn't know that till later. But what I came to learn, man, and discover about my father and my mom as I got older is, you know, they had their own baggage they were working through. And so my father was a drug addict, alcoholic, really starting from his teenage years. His father was an alcoholic, and so he's coming from this line of, you know, my dad is coming from this lineage of Mexican men that like to drink, not very faithful to their wives. My father got into harder stuff as well, and so he ended up losing his life. A little fast forward. He lost his life when I was about 24 to an overdose on heroin.
Wow.
But the first 18 years of my life was, you know, you know how a kid is when you grow up and you have three of your own, and you know how your kids look at you like your dad and mom are your heroes. You're all that the kid knows, that you are all I know. And so I see no fault in you for the first few years. And then after a while, 5, 6 years old, you start noticing mom and dad arguing a lot more, and it's intense. You feel the weight of the unhappiness, and I started feeling that, man. 5, 6, and 7 is when I really became aware of how dysfunctional home was. I have a younger sister who's a year and a half younger than me. I have a younger brother who's 7 years younger than me. So I'm the oldest of 3. In a family with a drug addict parent. My father also became physically abusive with me. He didn't really hit my sister because she was a girl. My brother was way too young to really get spankings. I got it. But I also was the one that partnered with my mom because my mom on her end was working through family history of drug addiction, gambling addiction. Her own father was out in the streets, doing his thing, and very unstable home on my mom's part as well. So she was letting all her trauma off on my dad, and my dad is just doing his thing and living his life. And I'm hearing this battle. I'm hearing this, all the time. And from a very young age, it was loud. I guess we call it toxic now. It was very dysfunctional. And I assumed this role of like the surrogate father to my sister and my brother, the protector for my mom and my siblings, the I guess self-titled man of the house in a lot of ways. Because I provided, as a little kid, I was the one providing the emotional support for my mom, who was fighting this evil, which was my father. At least that was the way that I processed it back then. Really, the evil was the addiction in my father and his own trauma growing up. He didn't have a great relationship with his father. And a little background story, even on my grandfather, my dad's father. He was a military vet. I believe he fought in wars. I don't know specifically. I imagine there could have been some trauma from that experience that caused my grandfather to travel the path that he did. My grandfather ultimately passed away to his own alcoholism. And my dad had two brothers. Both of them were addicts. One of them spent a lot of time in prison. He got mixed up with La Familia, the Mexican
gang.
Yes. And so that when he got out of prison, I remember one day my mom got a call from my Uncle Tommy that they were coming for him. They're coming for me, they're coming for me. And shortly after that, my mom had heard that he hung himself. And I guess his feelings were, they're coming for me, so I might as well just take my own life. Because I guess he double-crossed some people while he was in prison. My dad's other brother, alcoholic, he actually tried to kill my father. I was probably 10 or 11. And that uncle, my Uncle Bobby, stabbed my dad 18 times.
Oh, wow.
Tried to kill him. He got my dad once in the heart through the armpit. The knife went in through the armpit, pierced my father's heart. My father had to have open chest surgery. I know this sounds like crazy, but this was my childhood. My dad had open chest surgery, open heart. They had to repair the heart. My dad was, he was mid-30s at the time. And the doctor told my father, by looking at his heart, you have the heart of like a 60-something-year-old man. Because he was not taking care of his body, the drugs and the alcohol. So I remember all this. I remember my mom having to clean my dad's wounds. I remember my dad telling me the story that brother got mad at my father because my father refused to help his brother go kill somebody else in the neighborhood. And so one thing my father was not, that I'm aware of, he's not a murderer, he's not a killer. My dad was, he just drank, he smoked his weed, he did his drugs, and he was a construction worker. He loved us, and at the same time, I don't really think he knew how to always connect with us in healthy ways. So I feel like, man, I was doing social work from a very young age, just to kind of tie it all together with a nice bow. I didn't choose this field, man. It chose me. And I feel that the wisdom, or I believe that the wisdom I have today is directly correlated to, it's a direct result of the fact that I had such a dysfunctional home, and my father with his addictions, and my mother working through her trauma, and these two kids raising children and growing up themselves just trying to figure it out. That's what I was exposed to. But then as the oldest of three, we hear about this all the time, and in the child development courses that we've taken, or even just working with children ourselves, you have the oldest child in the family assumes a role, and that was me, the peacemaker, and trying to fix some things and trying to protect and do all of that. And I assumed the protector of my mom. I assumed it was my responsibility to like be this mouthpiece against my dad. I assumed it was my responsibility to get him to stop being an addict. And even saying that out loud makes me emotional. So if I start crying, it's because
No, you're good.
I'm sensitive about it. Still,
Yeah.
even to this day, I'm at 48. It's that you never forget these life experiences, brother. But they fuel the passion that you have to do this work that we do, right? I've had talks with God so many years, man, about why I would even continue to get clients who struggle with addiction.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Mexican men who have their families and who are struggling with addiction. And I've had talks straight up like, I don't even know why you keep giving me these kind of clients or kids that are starting off dabbling with drugs and stuff. Why are you giving them to me? I'm not qualified to help these kind of folks with those kind of challenges because I couldn't save my dad's life. I couldn't get my dad to stop using and being an addict. You know what I mean? And so that sits with me in a certain way where it's tender. I feel a sadness, and at the same time, I have seen in the work that I've done with folks, I don't know anybody else more qualified to be able to sit with these individuals and say, I really do get it. I really, really understand. And whether I say it in those words or I just sit with them in silence in their space, right? And I use my professional use of self. I take my life experiences, the wisdom that I've gained from all of that, and now I'm sitting with you, whoever you are, and you can just feel that I get it in the empathy and like the fact that my heart's going to connect with you, and I'm going to support you through this. And I think they can get that, man. And you sit in a lot of therapy sessions, I know you do, where whatever the topic is, you know it's like close to your heart and it's close to your life experiences, and you just know, I know I can help this person. I know I can help this person because of what I've lived. And they don't know it. They may not know. But the fact is, it's going to show in the work that you do. It's going to show in the work that we do. This passion that I have comes from a place of wisdom, but that wisdom comes from a place of pain and life experiences. And so how did I get into the field? I honestly and truly know it chose me. I started doing it at a very young age. I didn't have a choice until I got older. And I realized you could do other things. I loved math, as a matter of fact. In college, went to UCLA. Math was my favorite subject. I could have went engineering maybe. Sure, I loved it. But there was more about that heart space that I also really love connecting with people. Love connecting with people, and especially, brother, families and children who are going through it, who I know are wondering if anybody else knows what they're feeling. If, like you're the kid and you're stuck in this family and you feel the discourse, you feel the dysfunction, you feel the tension. You might even hear it as well. And then physically, emotionally you feel it. Physically you might feel it because you might be getting abused in any of the many horrible ways that children endure abuse. And you're just wondering who in the world is going to save me from any of this. I don't know your story. And maybe maybe you'll share. Maybe I can turn this on you and interview you a little bit too. In that I know what it feels like to wonder if anybody's going to come save me from the stress that I can't get away from in my own home. And you're like, I think I held on to any person in my life that represented some hope, or that just had more of an encouraging kind of spirit, that love that was genuine. And there was something in my mind that said, well, if this person is like that, there's got to be others that are like that. And I held on to that hope. And a lot of times I know other people, they don't grab that. They don't see that hope. And they just say, nobody can help me. I'm never getting out of this. My life is going to be this forever. And you see that break their soul down, right?
Yeah.
They're like, they just don't hope in life anymore and things like that. So, man, I honestly, it's a miracle that I was able to, at a very young age, just say, I'm going to hope that this example is proof that there are more people like that. And I'm going to believe that other people out there are loving and that want the best for me, or that, you know what I mean, that are going to pull for us in this family, that are going to help us, that will come and help. But it took a long time, man, you know, and I didn't really start seeing that and appreciating that until I moved away from home, until I went to college at 18. And I'm born and raised in San Diego. UCLA accepted me. No college in San Diego accepted me. Who knows why? But UCLA did, and that was my ticket to get out, to kind of grow as a young man, you know, to just see if I could survive. And that's when I was able to actually step out of just, you know, home environment and look at it from other angles and other perspectives, and really discover who I am and why I had to go through what I went through in my home. And so, you know, I don't know why my father's one of his you know, one of the ways that he dealt with his frustration was to beat on me. I don't know why. I don't know why that was his go-to. Maybe he was abused himself. I don't really know. He never talked about it, but I knew my dad was sad also. And so I felt that even as a little kid. I remember specifically at 10 years old, and I learned a very valuable lesson from my father to this day I still use as an example to my clients. And it was that we were playing baseball. I'm hitting the baseball, a little plastic bat, plastic ball. Me and my dad are laughing. We're having a great time. And I felt connected to my dad. And in the middle of our laughs and stuff, he pauses for a moment and he kind of sighs. Oh, I wish my dad would play with me like this when I was a kid. And I just remember thinking, dang, my dad's sad. And I also felt, but I couldn't fully understand, there was a history behind that statement that he's been holding on to for a long time. And I've only grown to understand that more as I've gotten older. That what we live as children can stay with us for the rest of our life, right? And it can still hurt. What are we going to do with that hurt? How are we going to use it, or is it going to use us? So just some of these bits and pieces, man. You know, I didn't find out until, you know, about my mother. I didn't find out until I was late 30s, early 40s, that my mom had tried to take her own life at one point when I was a little kid. And I didn't know that was the amount of stress that she was under, financially not getting help from my father, because he was, whatever money he made, he was spending it on his habits, his bad habits. And then whenever she made money, he was still trying to get from her to feed his habits and stuff. And plenty of things, you know. My mother and I have had some of the best conversations ever in my adult years, and specifically in my 40s, man. Like, where it's just, all right, Mom, you know, let's talk. You know, let's talk about, let's do that healing work, you know, about what we survived and all of that, Sostenes. I mean, I know that's kind of maybe a tangent, but the point of it all is that all of these life experiences fuel me, and they lay the foundation for who I am as a clinician. So when I sit down with different clients, man, I know what pain feels like to a certain level. You know, maybe not their specific example, but in some cases, very, very similar. But I know what broken families feel like, and I know what a hurting, searching child feels like, you know? the kid that feels stuck, the kid that feels frustrated. Like I loved my father, and I was just very frustrated with him all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to listen to him because that's my dad.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very interesting dynamic to now be able to live through, learn from, and then figure out ways to kind of take those lessons and add wisdom and help to other people's lives and stuff. And so, yeah, that's kind of my not so short answer to your question, but breakdown of really where I came from. This field, man, it just felt like the right choice for me because I had been doing it already from such a young age. So
that's thank you for like a real answer to the question, right? I think that's like the because we can go into theories and this and that, but like that story of that little kid, right, who was witnessing a lot, who was viewing a lot, who was stepping in a lot, right? And like that kid like stays still here, right? Still here with us having this conversation, right? And it's and there's like beauty in that. There's pain in it and there's like beauty in it as well, right? I think one thing that I value probably above all in therapy, right, outside of like push all the theories away, is when you get to like actually sit and witness someone, right? And people get to be seen and feel loved and feel like, oh, I'm actually seen now, right? I'm feeling understood. And I think that's like a gift that we offer a lot of people, right? And it's also sort of like the gift that like every child and adult deserves, right? That every child, right, in a chaotic home needs someone to like, hey, I see you, right? Slow down, I see you. And there's like so much beauty in that. Infants need that, right? Everyone kind of needs that sort of attunement that I think that sometimes goes overlooked in our work, right? With all like these theories and things that people want to do and this and this and this and that. But the deepest, I think the most healing thing is the ability to sit with people, being attuned with them, right? And like, oh, I resonate with the pain. I hear the pain. I see the pain. I see you as a human above this, right? So it makes a lot of sense that, especially you, David, like you walk in a room with that, right? You don't have to go in and tell this elaborate story about who David is every time to the client. But you walk in the room with that, right? So when that little kid for the client shows up, right, with anxiety, with a little kid, the adult person, but shows up as a child, right, with anxiety or brings up that memory, David is able to like relate, right? David is able to like, oh, like I see that child, right? And that sort of level of like compassion is able to hopefully transfer over from you, and they also are able to do to themselves now.
And if I can add to that,
too, go for it.
Two things. I love that you called it our gift, like the gift of our life experiences and what we bring into the room without even having to show a resume, right? First of all, we bring it in, and there's a confidence about it because the more we do it, the more we know that we can be effective in helping, right? But I love that you called it a gift. And then two, regarding the theories and all that, man, and maybe you discovered this too, man, in grad school, because I had already been working in the field as a mental health provider for 16 and a half years before deciding to go back to grad school. I was confident in my ability to connect with these kids and families. But the theories and stuff, when we started learning about them, I just remember feeling like, man, my life has been that already. So I get it. I had life context to what we were discussing in class. You know, I had life examples that really drove home. So then to me, some of these researchers, some of these professionals and their theories, I'm like, I've known that for such a long time. And it makes you reflect on how you got those lessons, because I wasn't reading their research. Right? I was living. I was just living life. I was being David. I was born in the family that I was born into, this brown kid, right? That like, man, and honestly, I'm Filipino Mexican, and I didn't look like my Mexican side. I didn't look like my Filipino side. I never felt like I fit in, even to that extent, like appearance-wise. I'm the tallest of my family. For many years, I was the darkest in my family. I was the skinniest kid. So I'm teased for being skinny, dark. You know what I mean? And I was into school, sports, and video games growing up.
Yeah.
And all the other Mexicans in my neighborhood were essays. You know what I mean? We dressed different. We talked different. We were into different things. I didn't even connect in that way to people in my neighborhood. You know, so I think that, you know, the theories and the professionals that were teaching all these theories, it just kind of reinforced what I had already lived. And it gave me more confidence with this belief that I could actually help people.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more about this being a gift, Sostenes. So I love that you said it that way. But what a gift and what a price that we paid, to like have this gift that we call it, to have this wisdom that we have. What a price we pay sometimes, man. Yeah. And I'm not just talking about class. I'm not talking about writing papers and doing research studies and getting good grades. You know?
Yeah, the word price is a very interesting thing, right? Because there is sort of this, even what you're saying, we're constantly revisiting ourselves, right? And as much as we can, right, technically revisit, we're constantly revisiting these stories. We're constantly revisiting our own self in these stories, right? It's as much as people will bring in their own stories, their own memories. Of course, it's always, right? It always will trigger some part of us, right? So the ability to even have, right? And this is why I think there's so much beauty in you being able to share your story and tell your stories, right? And I think this is why also like therapists going to therapy and doing all their own work and telling their own story is huge, right? Because like that own part of you is going to show up in the room. There's always going to show up in the room, right? So that's the kind of price that we look at price, right? The price that we paid. That like if we're not doing our own work, right? If we're not having these conversations, if you're not sitting down with your mom and revisiting some of that stuff, right? Like you don't want to be caught by surprise in the room, right? And like, because those memories are going to show up, right? And there's nothing wrong that they show up, right? And there's nothing wrong that we also have emotional connection to those memories as well. So like the price that we pay, we're constantly revisiting these memories.
Yes, 100%. We're constantly revisiting. We're looking within. I feel that's what I already love being a student. I already love learning. I never will have arrived and acquired all of the knowledge there is to acquire. There is always something I can learn. There is always something within me I can fine tune. I can learn other ways to approach some things. And so I don't take an ego in to any of it.
Yeah.
This mindset that I've arrived. Because I love so much to look at myself and say, is there something I'm doing wrong or can I do better? I you know, in some of those conversations with my mom, I want my mom to tell me about myself sometimes. You know what I mean? I want my wife or whoever's closest to me tell me about myself. You know what I mean? Like, am I dropping the ball here? Did that come off funny? You know what I mean? But nobody checks me as hard as I check myself. You know, nobody holds me more accountable than me. I'm pretty hard on myself, you know, privately, because I just want to make sure that I'm continuing to grow. You know, so in terms of like evolving from when I first started as a mental health professional to when I first decided to go back to grad school for my master's and then get my license, I feel like I'm constantly evolving, you know, constantly evolving. I love this kind of dialogue. I love to be able to sit with other folks who are of like mind to sharpen my tools. You know, like you might say something that sits with me and I'm stuck on it for a while because it's forcing me to think and grow. And I love that. And so, you know, I think it's like my style, if we want to call it that, has always been just very personal, person-centered, always. I don't like superficial. I never have. I kind of want to get straight to the heart of stuff.
Yeah.
If anything, that might be a fault, a flaw in me, if you will, is I'm like, listen, I already know we're both, like, I know pain. I know you're hurting. Like, let's cut through all of there's no need to be shy. Just once you get to know me, you'll see, you know what I'm saying? Like, let's just start digging. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's get to the meat on the bone. We don't have to beat around the bush, but then sometimes technique says, you know, you got to let them find their way to a place. There's a lot of value in that, so I'm not minimizing that. There's a ton of value in, you know, any of us being able to speak out loud our thoughts and our feelings, trying to come to some understanding. And then when that light bulb goes on, you know that whatever that discovery is or that revelation is, you know it's going to stick with you. So there's much value to that. I guess because also I've been doing this for so long as a child and then in my professional space, that I am like, all right, listen, pour your heart out. I'm ready to pour mine. Here I am. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's do this. Let's work together. I got you, right? And I believe that things can get better for you. I believe that healing can come. I know I'm living proof of that myself.
Yeah.
So how do how can I get my clients to start believing in themselves or hoping for some healing or life to get a little bit better for them too? But that might be the flaw sometimes, is that I'm ready to go. You know, like, I want to help you. I got you. Let's do this. And I got to pause and let them go at their pace a lot of times. So there's that. I think, you know, as it's evolved, I've just gotten more comfortable with slowing down.
Yeah.
But
I
learning,
think
always.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Always a student, always staying humble, but also saying, listen, Dave, you don't have it all figured out. So, you know, you got to pause and let them let your clients give you the information and build from there. But go ahead. I cut you off.
No, you're good, right? I think there is always this dance around that, right? There's this beauty of dance, and I think that's like I think most therapists, right, especially folks from that social work field, right? We come and we want to help, right? We want to bring in like results. We want to fill in those gaps,
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And I think that it comes from a really good place, right? But to be
in those roles, a lot of times we have such limited time, and family may be in and out of our caseload so quick that it's like you do have to rush in some of those situations, right? And also, it's like if we don't act fast enough, this kid could get taken from the family. You know what I'm saying? So there is that element there. We do have to hurry.
Yeah.
And I think that, yes, that is a bad habit sometimes when it comes to just private practice and therapy, which I'm sure you were about to say, because we have time to unpack, right, and peel the layers and stuff. Go ahead.
No, I think it's right on. I think it's knowing the clients, knowing the space, right? I think I can't remember where I heard this before. Like sometimes we are a different therapist with a different client. Like every client gets a different therapist, right? And that's a part of our work, right? And knowing when to hold and when to like dance and when to say, oh, like this person can't go there. But then this is the whole part of us also being aware of our own feelings and be able to say like, hey, that story, like it made me really sad. Right? If they can't go there emotionally, like I heard that story, that made me really sad. I'm wondering what's happening for you when you retell that story, right? And to be able for them to bring up that sort of interjection that we're bringing in, we're also giving them language, right? And a lot of people didn't have language for feelings, right? A lot of people didn't have ability to kind of say like, oh yeah, that made me feel really sad, right? Or that talking about that made me feel really excited. It made me feel this and this and this and this and this and that. Right. So we get to sort of do the internalization part, right? The same way that they internalize whatever they internalize throughout the whole childhood, whatever it might be. Now they internalize to an extent the therapist, right? So we're like, that made me feel really sad when I heard that, right? So I think, and to be able to know when to kind of make that dance and right? And for them to be able to know, okay, like now they're able to say that for themselves, right? Now they're able to say like, oh, like that makes me feel really sad. That makes me feel a certain way. That makes me feel a certain this and this and that. I think at our core, our work, we're consistently like healing relational wounds, right? It's right. Everyone comes in with relational wounds, right? Being that with their parents, right? And they come in with all these relational wounds, and for us to kind of step up and say like, oh, like I'm not responding the same way that like your mom responded. I'm not responding the same way your dad responded or whoever responded to you.
Right.
I'm sitting here with you, and I accept you for being whoever you are, and this and this and that.
Yeah.
How does that? As I said, what comes up for you?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of thoughts. First of all,
Yeah.
a lot of thoughts in that. I just really appreciate. It feels good to be able to help.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think it just feels amazing to be able to help. Even now I'm reflecting back on like my father again. He's such an important piece of my life because all our memories were not bad. Even some of the hardest times added so much value to me in that there were conversations that my father and I had that changed me, that made me David today. And had I not had that, I question how I would show up for people even today, as a father, as a man, as a friend, in every aspect of my life. But I just, I think the way that going through all of life stuff allowed any of us to show up for people. It's priceless, brother. You know what I mean? It's just, it really is. And so, yeah, I mean, I want to share one other story, if I may, about a conversation with my father. Well, there's two. One is really short, and that was just, like falling in love with my brown skin, because there was a time where I felt bad about being so much darker than my cousins because they were teasing me about it. I didn't know it was a problem before, but they made me feel like it was a problem because the way that they were teasing me about it. And I remember going home crying one day, and my father said, "What's going on?" "Oh, my cousins, I'm not going to say their names. They might listen to the episode, and I don't want them to feel called out, but they were basically teasing me." I told my dad, like, they're calling me the N-word. And my dad's response, with no hesitation, Sostenes, he just said, if anybody makes fun of the color of your skin again, you just snap your fingers and say, "My tan is cool." And that's all it took for me. After that, I just remember I snapped my fingers just like my dad did. "My tan is cool." And I remember smiling right after that. And I remember just feeling convinced that my tan was cool. It helped so much that my father said it to me with so much confidence. But that evolution of constantly learning, and then when you are learning, figuring out how to effectively use it, whatever that skill is. I just love it, man. I love being a student. I love growing and this idea of finding ways that I can do things better. I even think, too, I am very mindful of trends and stuff that are going on within the field and professionals and what they're, we're trying to do or implement. And I just, nothing beats authenticity, man.
Yeah.
And nothing beats
100%.
Like that's, if you want to call that a trend, I think that's a foundation. I think that's a non-negotiable is that I really want for clinicians to know how to be genuine more than, they've learned the skill of authenticity.
Yeah.
You see that a lot. Like people talk about authenticity as a skill. And I get it, but we have the gift of authenticity as well.
Yeah.
That comes from a place of, I know what it feels like, and even though I don't know what your situation is specifically, I have a good sense of what pain feels like.
Yeah.
Right? And so to sit there, it's not uncomfortable to sit there with you. And guess what else could come from pain, right? And we can say that with confidence. I recognize that some people may have not lived certain life experiences that I have. They may not be able to draw from the same well of life experiences to really connect with the person heart to heart. So they have to do the skills side of it, the technique side of authenticity or genuine positive regard for somebody. But man, I want that to stick around in a world that seems to be getting so much more fascinated with superficial, brother. You know what I mean? I believe that we're going to, as a society, we're gonna, something's gonna happen where we're kind of gonna move back to, man, all that superficial stuff, outward appearance, or whatever. I think we're gonna move back to, we need to reset and kind of get real again. And I'm looking forward to that. You know what I mean? And so I think clinicians, we should kind of be ahead of that and ready for like, look, we're here. You know what I mean?
I have a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go
Please.
ahead.
No, please. I was just going to ask you the same question you asked me in the beginning, so maybe I'll wait. But I want to know about your story. I've never been able to ask you why you got in this field. You know what I mean? Because what I see is when I first saw you, and even in the group that we were in, I wasn't there very often anyways. Because of so many of the maybe we were just there on different days. So many of my clients were online. I didn't get to actually sit and talk to you, another brown skin clinician, a male clinician, right? And I didn't see many of them in my grad program. I mean, a handful. Most of them were women. In the program that I went to, most of them were Latina women. You know what I mean? And so I didn't see that. But anyway, so I'm curious to know that about you. Yeah. But I know you're going to ask a question. This is your podcast. Being in my history in radio, I'm used to interviewing. So,
I'll share a little bit, and I'll circle back to the question that I have. And I guess the question, I'm still sort of like answering that question in my mind and everything. But a little bit about me, David. I guess it's interesting, right? I was born in Brazil. I was raised there I was 8 years old. So like Rio de Janeiro, like the favelas. I don't know if people know what the favelas are, but
absolutely.
Yeah, so I was really raised in poverty and everything, and we immigrated to the U.S. So me, my mom, dad, and 4 brothers, right? Or I'm one of the 4 brothers, right? And we immigrated to the Miami area. And I was raised most of my life in the Miami area. My parents, they were ministers, right? They worked at a church, and they always sort of like worked in churches.
Is that what moved y'all from Brazil to America?
No, like it was just like immigrating for a better life, right? But ever since as a kid in Brazil, even here in the U.S. as well, both my parents always like took in a lot of people, right? So I always would say that I'll wake up in the middle of the night and there's like random homeless people in the living room. I'm getting water. I'm like stepping over people, right? So that was like my childhood. So like I think on the podcast I actually talked a bit about this, right? So like my mom and dad will always take people in, right? And they will sit down in the kitchen. They will have these conversations with these people, right? People that had experienced like domestic violence, whatever they had experienced in their life, right? They need somewhere to stay that night, that week, or whatever it might have been happening with them. So me and my brothers will probably be in the background, right? So like hearing all of this stories, maybe a little bit too young to be hearing all of these very graphic stories, but we're hearing all of the story, and that was probably my first sort of like experience of therapy, right? Without knowing it was like therapy,
right?
That people were sitting down with them, having these long conversations, and like hearing their stories and all of this stuff, right? As most kids, right, and it got in trouble, 4 brothers living in one household, really close in age. A lot of us got in trouble a lot. And until like how old I was in my early 20s, right? And all I wanted to do was like make music and be like a famous rapper. People don't know this about me. So I was like part of a rap group in Miami, and we used to travel and we did all of these things, right? But there was always something in me. I don't know what it was to like even like being aware of like people, being aware of like people's pain and hurt and some of that stuff. Eventually, I started working with kids, like doing like artwork. Like we had a studio, so we used to like bring kids in like to do like artwork and learn how to record and make music and some of that stuff. And it just became really apparent and easy that I connected with them, right? And I was like, oh, this is like, I'm really just natural at this, right? And before it was just like me, just like I need to share everyone my story, right? I was doing this and doing this and doing this, and that was like sort of my whole thing. And from that, I had an opportunity in my early 20s to move to Arizona. So I got married. My wife and I happened to work with Native Americans, right? They were like, oh, I see the work that you're doing with kids. Come work with Native Americans. I was like, oh, you guys gonna pay me to do this? Like work with kids? So moved to Arizona. I started working in the indigenous community, right? And I started seeing a lot. Started working with families and families who like lost custody of their kids, right? So a lot of my work became this sort of like mediator and like case manager, mediator who like sat with people and while they like trying to regain custody of their kids and some of that stuff. And I had a supervisor who was an LCSW. She was a therapist. She was like, you're really good at like sitting with them. You're not really good at this case management work. That you're supposed to be doing.
Wasn't a huge fan of that either.
And she's like, but you're really good with sitting with people and being with people and some of that stuff, right? That really pushed me to go into graduate school. I was totally fine, like where I was in that space. Like I was like, I'm fine working with this community, even though I was getting paid like $40K a year, whatever. I was like fine with my life at the time. But there's, I guess the idea of like being a therapist really started like moving in me, right? I started reading a lot about like trauma and intergenerational work and some of that stuff, and specifically with the Native community, I was sitting in these spaces, right, with like the mom, the grandmother, right, and like all of these different like generations in the room. And see like the pain and hurt, right? And wow. And even in that, I started like reflecting in my own childhood and who I was as a person, right? Even though I grew up in this family upbringing that on one way looks pretty like well put together, right? Mom and dad, they're like ministers and this, right? But they spent their whole life like trying to take care of the whole world and like forgot about their 4 young boys, right? That navigated this world, and also understanding reasons why they went into the church, right? Or reasons why they kind of went to that, because they had very, very like traumatic backgrounds, right? And so that was what originally kind of like led me to the field. Like I think like that work and that I did in Arizona with the indigenous community was like huge. I think like before I went to graduate school, before I did any of that, I got to like sit with people and like hear their pain and that's when I probably the best training I probably went through was just doing that, right? I think, and even like before even working with the families, I worked with like the kids individually, right? I was like a behavior like technician and some of those jobs just kind of work with kids, and I kind of just was able to sit with kids and I was like, oh, like started seeing my younger self a lot, right? So that's a little bit about my background. I'm sure there's a lot more there.
I mean, it's unique. I've never met anybody, who worked closely with indigenous populations as well. But I mean, even your journey of coming over to the States, and then your parents' passion, and how that shaped you. And I'm sure that I don't know that your parents' intentions were to, give you like a social worker heart. but it's almost like you didn't have a choice. It was there. And so something about that just infused into the fabric of who you are now as a man, and it just felt natural to help, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think like these stories that I get to hear and experience, right, to an extent, I have heard them for like decades, right? So it's not like I'm stepping into a new place, right? So I think that's a interesting thing that it's of course it's difficult for a kid to like witness some of that, right? The trauma and anxiety of people coming in, people who just suffer like domestic violence, whatever they're going through, right? And every time you take people in, things happen in your home as well, right? So people have their own issues and they bring that onto you, right? Bring it onto your family. So of course there's people who acted up in our home and attacked us and attacked this and this and that. So there's a lot of some of that stuff that occurred when you bring in a lot of people, right? Who have their own
strangers,
strangers, right? And that's some of the stuff that's interesting. The question that I had for you, David, right? And this is a question that I think we're all always trying to like make sense of, right? So like I can count, God, like it's multiple clients that I have worked with, right? Who for some reason came to the US when they were 8 years old, right? So it's like how the heck does this person shows up in my office, in my space,
and you are the clinician, right?
Yeah, and it's like, right, and this story of like this, and that's one thing that I probably have like noticed a lot more in my sort of like as a therapist, as like I evolve as a therapist. It's like, oh, like a part of me is showing up in this space. I don't know what ushered it in here, but it's showing up, right? This is you, David, right? You talk about like, oh, this Mexican guy who's a father who's struggling with addiction, right? And that experience of like, oh, like we're constantly are putting our in this space where we're seeing ourselves again, right? These sort of like cycles of life shows up for us again.
I love it.
What's your thoughts about that? How do you think? How do you think that happens?
Why and how? Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad you shared that with me and your experiences too, because that kind of affirms to me that this is not by chance. This is not an accident. That's and that's what I had sat within my spirit. That's the conclusion that I had come to, is because I was asking, I'm like, God, why? You know, and I don't get it, because that one client that you just mentioned, the Mexican father whose kids were disappointed in him, his wife is not happy and also disappointed in him. I'm sitting in that session and I'm holding all this emotion back because I literally felt like I was talking to my father.
Yeah.
And that my father was answering questions that I still had that I wish I could ask him about just why. Why are you this way, right? And of course, I can't ask the client that. We're not having that kind of conversation. But the session ended, bro, and I broke down quick.
Yeah.
And that's within, because he's not the first addict that I have been given to counsel. But that's the one that was like, all right, why am I getting any of these ones? I'm not qualified to help these people. But really what that feeling was is I can't save them.
Yeah.
And then that's that part that I got to wrestle with.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you shared with me even, your story on how you came to America and the age you came, and that you've gotten clients since then that are around the same age.
Yeah.
And they've moved here to the States. And you're thinking, why do I, right?
Yeah.
Why do I keep getting these? It can't be by chance, man.
Yeah.
It cannot. If it's happening like that over and over and over, we have to believe that there's a design, a divine design. We have to, that our source is something bigger than ourselves. And we're just playing a role right now. But we have life experiences that make us uniquely qualified to sit with the person who came over to this country at 8 years old. Who else is going to sit with that person the way that you can to say, matter of fact, I know exactly what that feels like. I know very well what that feels like.
Yeah.
And even if you don't say it in those words,
Yeah.
it's that a confidence that you take into that conversation, because you know, well, damn, you know, if anybody's qualified to talk about this, it's definitely me. Why? Question mark, right? I'm sure that people can come up with their own conclusions. The conclusion that I came up with, because after that first session with that one client that I shared, the father, man, I just started. I turned on my phone, and I hit record, and I just started talking to get the thoughts out in the moment. Very raw, very emotional conversation with God. But I was like, I want to be able to go back and watch this and listen to. But as I talked out the question marks that I had in my mind, I mean, the one that I really felt comfort in is that God saying to me, I'm going to continue to give you these types of clients because it's time for you to heal from your own pains that came from that experience. That it's time for you to figure that out and grow and heal and continue, you know what I mean, and continue to help. So whatever feelings, whatever insecurities, whatever negative feelings or emotions that you may have had even from that journey and the whys of your childhood, Sostenes, I mean, I believe, I'm so convinced, man, that none of this happens by accident, you know? Because other people can live and do live our same experiences, and they don't choose the same path as us. And they weren't able to maintain that internal strength to like have a sane mind. You know what I mean? I know plenty of people who came from the same background as me. That are addicts themselves, and their path is way different. And I realized I could have done that. I could have been that. And maybe you've seen examples of individuals that came over to this country and struggled with or had parents similar childhood as yours, and you're like, I could have been that. I could be on drugs right now. I could be homeless right now. I could be dead or have overdosed and followed my father's footsteps right now. My father did not live to 48 years old. My father died when he was 44 or 45 years old. And that number, that age was always etched in my mind. Because I'm like, God, am I going to outlive my own father? And then it came, and you're like, wow, you know. But it's just the why behind why we go through all of that stuff, man. I would imagine, I'd love to hear other people's conversations or thoughts on that too. I heard God's voice to me say, I'm going to continue to, because it's time to heal in all of that area. Right? Nobody is qualified in the way that you are to help in the way that you're going to be able to help. But that pain sometimes from my past, it seeps in. The doubt will come in, and it'll tell me you're not qualified to help these people. Well, I don't want to accept that narrative anymore. I don't want to accept that I can't do it. When maybe I can be very effective in it. Maybe you've seen that about yourself too, that maybe you can and you have been very effective in working with and sitting with people who feel foreign. You know what I mean? In the land that they're in, they feel foreign. They don't feel connected. It doesn't even have to be the migrant story. It could just be that you don't feel connected to the village that you are currently living in, the family that you're born to, and you feel foreign. So how do I sit with that individual, understanding what I felt, the wisdom that you've gained from your life experiences, to say, I get it, you know? But I just believe there's purpose behind it, in why we went through that, why we continue to get these types of clients that hit so close to home. That is the part that really challenges me the most. Maybe you too, is that I'm not going to have it all. The confidence is not going to be at 100 all the time. It's going to be like, oh, this is rocky, you know? This is hitting me in ways that, like, you know, we have some colleagues in this field who are survivors of sexual trauma, and they're getting sexual trauma victims all the time. We have colleagues that are survivors of domestic violence, and they're getting those clients all the time. And so we have these talks with people, you know, like, who else is better qualified than somebody who has survived it and who has learned and is learning to heal through it, and now they have wisdom and healing to kind of plant back into other people's lives, you know. So I mean, that's where my mind goes with your question.
No, that's a great answer. It's a interesting like phenomenon, right? But it always sort of like lead us to like healing. And I think that's like the biggest part around this, that there's this opportunity for like healing, right? And no one has arrived, and if they have, then good for them. But like I don't think no one has like, arrived yet, right? And so there's this constant part of us that we're consistently like learning. Like I recently reread a book called Play in Reality from like the 40s from like Winnicott.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and he starts off the book talking about just like thanking all his clients and what he has like learned from them.
Thanking them.
Yeah.
I love that.
He's like, I never would have been able to write this book without you guys, because you guys have thought who I am as a human, who I am this, and seeing this part of me that I was not, for whatever reason, didn't see yet, right? And I think there is so much like beauty in being able to like, oh, that 8-year-old kid, he's in the room, right? And the things that people didn't say to me, the ways that people didn't show up for me, whatever, all of that, right? That environment around that 8-year-old kid, right? That I'm like, oh, like what happened? So I'm able to ask these stories or questions in a way that this person, right? They're able to start like, oh yeah, like I struggled with this, I struggled with that, without me needing also to like take up space and tell my own story in the room, right? And to be like, okay, that part of me is showing up. And I think it's huge for that. And I think, and for us to even know that, again, like a lot of us want to jump in and want to sort of like have these techniques or these interventions and the intervention thing most of the time is be able to like, oh, I know that story. But let me ask you questions about that, what that kid wanted to hear. Let me ask you a question about all of the stuff that's happening around them.
That's so good. Yeah.
It's
even asking, even what your life experiences have taught you, you know, certain questions to ask that I probably wouldn't even think of, right?
Yeah.
That's that value, that's that gift that you bring to the table, because your client might be like, man, either I never thought of that, or I didn't realize that other people thought this way or felt this.
Yeah.
Right? But you just get me in a certain way, Sostenes, that I couldn't have imagined people understand me, you know, that experience that you went through. So,
yeah. And I think
thanking your clients for what lessons they have taught you is remarkable.
Yeah, it's because we are, like you're saying, like we're always learning. There's no way that we don't learn from our clients, right? There's beauty in even sitting with people that you're sitting with, and it's like, oh, like this person is, right? They have held all of this, right? And they have grown from all of this, right? And like what a testament to like the work and the human that people are. But I don't want to take your time for too long, David.
I appreciate
anything
it,
that you want to kind of share with us, a little bit about your practice and where to find you?
Yeah, so on social media, you can find me anywhere. David Hernandez Loves You. I make it real easy that way because that kind of sticks. It has a ring to it. David Hernandez Loves You. I do have my own podcast that I'm working on. I've been on hiatus since my second daughter was born, because second kid has added extra fun to the house, and but my podcast is called the Push Project podcast. In a nutshell, it is that we all have a story of those things in our life that we've had to push through in order to discover who we are or purpose. And I love having conversations with individuals about that story. What did you have to push through to discover who you are today, or what are you pushing through, you know, to really on your journey to find out who you are and your purpose. I've had amazing guests on, and so that's something that is current and ongoing. I also right now what I'm trying to organize here in LA is just trying to get a group of clinicians together, black and brown clinicians, as like number one consultation group, but really just to fellowship a bit, and just connect and see how big the network is, and know who we are and where we are. We could talk about cases and stuff. 100%. I love that because we can sharpen each other's minds that way. But really, too, to just feel that you're not so alone, because this private practice journey can feel alone.
Yeah, 100%.
Because our work is one-on-one, and most days we might be going back-to-back sessions, and if I'm online all day, I'm not even going outside.
Yeah.
So just be able to say, you can feel like you're on an island sometimes because you're just doing that one-on-one work. It's good to step out and try to connect with other clinicians and see how they're doing and see what they're doing and learn and stuff like that. So, I've been talking to a number of different clinicians here. We're trying to organize a time to meet and a place to meet and just gathering interest in that network. It's not even a group, private practice group or anything like that. It's really more just connecting and supporting one another. But because I don't see many black and brown clinicians as I move through my own practice, I'd like to know where we are, and hear if my experiences are matched up with yours and things like that. So those are the two things right now that are pressing in terms of, passion projects. And then I'm a dad, I'm a family man, and I love having two daughters and being just wrapped up in that, man. And that's kind of been the joy of my life is being a dad. I started late, I started my fatherhood, my own babies in my mid-40s. So, yeah.
Still look young, David. You still look young.
Right here, this is how you can tell all the grays that are coming out. Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Thank you for having me on again, too. This has been great.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, appreciate you, man.